minutes after 10. I'm Sizwe Mkhwebane, standing in for Busisiwe Mkhwebane. And thank you for a brilliant and a riveting first open line. Wonderful to be joining you for these 3 weeks. And it's only set to get more lit, because I have with me in the studio for the next hour one of South Africa's most brilliant journalists and legal journalists, Karyn Maughan, who's legal journalist at Tiso Blackstar, also doing incredible work over at Newsroom Africa. And we are going to be looking at the recent setback from the North Gauteng High Court yesterday, where the judge, Molopa Setosa, found that President Ramaphosa had indeed complied with the remedial action. First things first, though, Karyn Maughan, thank you so much for joining us.
And I'm really loving the African print in the studios and the amazing shirt. And so I'm very happy to be here.
It's an SMWX takeover.
Exactly.
So good to have you. You know, there are so many cases going on. It seems like there's a daily ritual with the public protector in court. Can you just explain in simple terms for us what yesterday's judgment was about? Specifically, what was yesterday about?
Okay, so the public protector released 2 reports in regard to Public Enterprises Minister Karyn Maughan, and specifically related to his tenure involvement with SARS. The first of those reports related to the early retirement of, SARS Commissioner Ivan Pillay about a decade ago, where the public protector found that that Maughan had unlawfully authorized in a way that amounted to maladministration, early retirement for Ivan Pillay, who had then subsequently been immediately rehired on a fixed term contract. And she made a number of recommendations, including that money be recovered. I think it's about over R1 million, etc. But she also said that President Cyril Ramaphosa needed to take appropriate disciplinary action against Maughan over this matter.
So she imposed an action on the president with this Maughan matter.
Yes, that was part of her remedial action. There's a second report. That was in May this year. Then she does a second report on the so-called SARS rogue unit, rogue unit, in which she makes a number of very adverse findings, including that the unit was illegally, unlawfully established. And she makes the same recommendation, albeit quite differently. She, I think, specifies a deadline by which action should be taken. Where the waters get somewhat muddy is that in the first instance, Karyn Maughan is taking both those reports on review.
Right.
But in the first report, the Pillay report, he didn't bring a Part A of his application like he did with the SARS. He didn't ask for an interdict staying the remedial action pending the outcome of his review.
Right.
So I think that's what made this situation difficult, and that's why we saw the president kind of getting involved in a way that, I think he would not necessarily have wanted to get involved. But essentially what happened was, the public protector said to the president, within 30 days of you getting this Pillay report, you need to give me an implementation plan, basically detailing what action you intend to take. And the president does that, and he says in that report, listen, Maughan is taking this matter on review. As a consequence thereof, I'm actually going to, I'm not saying I mustn't do anything like that, but I'm going to defer, taking any action until such time as that review is finalized.
Right.
We all know that the relationship at the moment between Maughan, the public protector, and maybe to a degree the president is a little bit strained.
To put it mildly.
We all saw the letters that were being read out by the judge in court yesterday, where it was very apparent that the public protector did not feel very happy about the way in which the president subsequently handled that matter. She basically said to him, you need, absent of an interdict, you need to go and actually take action. He says that she essentially told him, you need to go to court, and that's what he did. And she then subsequently opposed him, and we saw the ruling that we had yesterday.
Right. So thanks so much. That's very useful to just, look through and piece together this very complex legal battle and how yesterday fits into this wider picture. Let's move on to the judgment yesterday, which ostensibly went in favor of the president. How do you explain what the judge says, and
what do you think the implications are for this part of that legal battle?
Okay, what's important here is that in that Pillay report, the public protector didn't specify a deadline by which the president should act. And I think that was a major part of the decision that was reached yesterday. Because he said he actually got an order that he had in fact complied with the remedial action because he'd supplied the implementation report. He at no stage seeks to undermine the report. He just says, look, pending, I can't make an irrational and unreasonable decision until such time as I know what the outcome of that review is. And the judge essentially he's not saying, I'm not going to listen to the public protector. He's just saying, I need to stay this remedial action until such time as this issue is resolved.
Right.
Because otherwise I potentially open myself up to litigation from the minister who's going to say that this is completely unfair and irrational.
Okay, so just on that, because there was no deadline set, since the president had embarked on at least some process, essentially he was found to have been being compliant with the remedial action.
Yeah, because there were 3 remedial actions. You have to note the report, you have to supply the implementation, and then you have to take action. And interestingly enough, the court actually gave an order that within 30 days of the reviews and stuff the review being finalized, the president would have to take action. Obviously, that's in circumstances of the minister not being successful.
Right.
So then there was a concrete deadline set. But I think that absence of the deadline was potentially, one of the things that was made massively, significantly in the president's favor. And, I don't know, the public protector already indicating through a legal representative, that they may choose to take this matter to try and challenge it. But given that it's an interlocutory application, we don't know which way that'll go.
Take us through then some of the timelines that flow from this. As you say, there's the full review application of this particular matter. How soon can we expect that to be finalized, and what will flow from what we've seen coming out of the judgment yesterday?
Well, I think what's going to be interesting is if the EFF is already attempting to appeal the first judgment that was given. That was Judge Stilette Potterall.
Right.
And that was in relation to the SARS rogue unit matter. That was where Gordhan, in fact, did apply for an interdict to stay the remedial action in that report. And then, he's now going to have his review before, that remedial action is enforced, if it is enforced. And the EFFs, have raised a number of issues. They believe that this is, amounts to a constitutional crisis. Certainly they were very, very strong in their kind of arguments around that issue in the High Court. The public protector herself, through her advocate, being very, very strong in her arguments about this amounting to a constitutional crisis, because she has viewed it as the president sort of openly defying her. The court yesterday saying that simply isn't true. He's just asking to defer this pending the resolution of the court case. But, it's very clear that the pot is on the stove. The pot is boiling. Someone needs to take the pot off. I think that, despite the court victories and what have you, I think we are in the middle of quite a significant crisis, and I don't know that it's going to end very well for us as a democracy, to be honest.
You're right. I mean, there does seem to be this huge battle being waged, yesterday's judgment just being one element of those battles. But you would have to say that, at least on legal grounds, the president and Minister Gordhan have sustained many, it seems, consecutive victories. The political question, though, still remains as to whether, this will spark some kind of major political battle. What's your view on how the legal process fills into the broader political questions that we're faced with?
Well, I mean, there's a number of things that are going to flow out from this, but I think that the issue is this: if you as a person are found guilty of a number of things in a public protector report, and you fundamentally believe that report is wrong, the argument advanced by the EFF is that there seems to be, because I sometimes, it seems to be that because of the Nkandla judgment in the Constitutional Court, you need to actually get a review judgment, in their view, to stop the implementation of remedial action. And that, not doing so is essentially going to cause what they described as a bloodbath of democracy, that people will simply litigate for the sake of litigating to avoid the consequences of public protector reports, that, this is going to allow people to ignore the public protector. But this has been, this kind of litigation, the way in which this was played out is settled and tried law. It's, according to the Oderkraal judgment, if you facing an adverse, if you have an adverse finding made against you, or, decision is taken, for instance, that you have, a problematic tender, and, that you want to challenge that, you can bring an application to say, well, I believe I have a case in law to show that actually this tender was properly awarded, and I can prove my case. And until such time as, we can resolve this in a court of law, I will make a case and I will prove to the court that I have a case, and that will then suspend the implementation of that decision. And I will be able to keep conducting and doing the tender until such time as the court actually turns around and says, yes, we support. So it's a very important principle of law, and it's been something that's, going on for quite a while. I mean, I think their frustration of well-resourced people being able to litigate in ways that other people can't, I understand that, but I'm not necessarily 100% sure that I get that getting an interdict or getting a stay pending the resolution of a review, where the president says, if that review is not successful, yes, indeed, I will take action. I don't know that amounts to the kind of democratic bloodbath that the public protector has argued it does.
Sure, and there's been some criticism of the EFF as well, particularly in the way that they have chosen to criticize the judgments and the judges making those judgments. Some suggestions that this is part of a wider delegitimization of the judiciary. What do you say to those criticisms, and do you think they have merit?
Well, I mean, we saw similar things happening during the tenure of then President Jacob Zuma, where we saw people like, for instance, Gwede Mantashe, Nathi Nhleko, coming out and, saying things about the North Gauteng High Court. And, if we get Pretoria High Court, if we know that a case is going to be heard there or in the Western Cape, it's going to be an adverse judgment against us, counter-revolutionary judges, etc., etc. And at that stage, I think it caused so much concern with the Chief Justice that he actually arranged an engagement between the President and a number of ministers in his cabinet and a number of judges, to try and sort of say, well, if you want to criticize us, then criticize us specifically on the law. Don't attack us. Don't make claims about our agendas and whatever, unless you can, substantiate that with evidence. I think the EFF, I mean, certainly Mbuyiseni Ndlozi yesterday trying to advance an argument that the judge had failed to meet the legal requirements in terms of granting an urgent interdict. So, I mean, criticizing her on the law there. But the fact of the matter is that in this case, there was, the interdict flowed as a consequence of the judge finding that indeed there was a basis to find that the president had complied with the remedial action, and the interdict flowing as a consequence of that. I think that Mogoeng's argument is solid. I think you as journalists, we can say it as well. Like, if you want to criticize us in terms of the facts that we convey, where you feel that we've made an argument that is not factually substantiated, bad in law, etc., go for it. Be specific. But large, sweeping statements about, you having an agenda or being a puppet of Stratcom or whatever it is, doesn't really help. It's effectively just a mechanism to silence people, and I think that's part of the problem.
10:20, we're in conversation with the brilliant legal journalist Karyn Maughan. We are going to be taking a quick break, and we'll be getting back to dissecting what yesterday's judgment in relation to the battle between Minister Gordhan, the president, and the public protector means for our politics and for our lives going forward. It's 23 minutes after 10. I'm Sizwe Mkhwebane. Welcome to the Eusebius Mkhwebane Show, and I'm standing in for the next 3 weeks. It's been wonderful to have you all on board. We had our first open line, and now we're engaging with the brilliant legal journalist from Tiso Blackstar, Karyn Maughan, on this raging battle between the president, Minister Gordhan, and the public protector. We had that judgment that came through yesterday, largely in favor of the president, and so we are trying to tease apart what this all means at this very point. Karyn, let's look at the implications for the various parties in this battle. And let's start with President Ramaphosa. What do you think this legal victory means for him in terms of the wider picture of the Bosasa PP report and his relationship with Minister Gordhan as it pertains to these public protector battles?
I mean, what's so fascinating with this is that it's actually, I mean, when he was filing his papers, he kept saying, you know, this isn't a big political drama. This is a simple legal issue. You know, I'm just going to court because I'm trying to, you know, make sure that I'm acting by the book here. And it doesn't, I find it unfortunate that I had to go to court to do this, but, you know, it's the appropriate thing to do. He didn't want to respond to the public protector's very heated accusations in her papers that essentially he had taken Pravin Gordhan's side, was the word she used, that his decisions in regard to this matter were based on friendship. And, you know, I think that was, also one of the terms that she used, and that, you know, she actually says in her papers that she doesn't, you know, she believes that there may potentially be a more sinister motive behind all of this. So there was a kind of desperate attempt from the president to keep the politics out of it, and then a real pushback from the public protector to push the politics right back in terms of, you know, openly referring to Pravin Gordhan as his, you know, reported political ally, etc., etc. So, you know, basically what this court ruling does is it takes the bullet out the gun of those within the ANC, and we know that there are a number of them who would say, you know, this is ironic that you're claiming to be the Mr., you know, New Dawn South Africa, where you have actually not, you defying the public protector, you're not complying with the public protector, you are no different to Jacob Zuma. And that's why that Nkandla reference and the EFF's focus on it is quite interesting to me, because there has been an attempt throughout this process to say that Ramaphosa is no different from Zuma because of his conduct in this particular matter. The court's saying that is not the case, saying that, you know, as I said before, Zuma and the parliament just openly ignored and defied the public protector, and the court had to intervene as a consequence of that. So, you know, if within the internal dynamics of the ANC, which we know, I mean, are beset by strife, so deeply divided, you couldn't have people on more opposite sides of the spectrum than, you know, for instance, Ace Magashule and Cyril Ramaphosa. And those tensions are manifesting themselves constantly, publicly, and often in a way that I think is quite embarrassing for the ANC in terms of its internal policy coherence. You know, I think that the ruling yesterday will certainly, you know, safeguard him against those accusations. The Bosasa matter is due to, he had bought a Part A himself in that case. Of course, we know that report, the public protector essentially makes findings that Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign finances may have somehow been complicit or involved in money laundering. And she also compels him to disclose who all his donors are. He's, you know, and also, you know, recommends the NDPP investigate, etc., etc. What's now happened is that he's bought a Part A of that application. Being
an interdict again.
An interdict to say, I want to stay this remedial action until the outcome of my review. We know that the public protector, after initially saying that she wanted the NPA to be no order as to directing the NPA as to what to do, has now sort of said, well, she will comply. You know, she won't oppose the order. So, you know, it'll be a thing like 5 minutes in court. The president will get his stay, and the public protector and the president both saying they want that case resolved as soon as possible, which I think is in the best interest of all of us, because whilst there's this kind of shadow hanging over these question marks, I think that it's very difficult for the average South African to really know who and what they should, you know, to be assured. And I think the president has actually said as much in his court papers. He said it's completely you know, problematic to have a cloud, as he described it, hanging over his head until such time as this matter is finalized. So they're trying to have it heard on an urgent basis. But with the Pravin Gordhan cases, it's a little bit more complicated.
And we're going to come on to that after we go to the headlines. But, you know, I think what's really interesting and what's useful in the way that you're explaining this is that we need to see this as multiple concurrent cases happening at once.
Absolutely.
And they all have a way of linking with each other, but they also all have separate merits that need to be thought through. So the really important thing for us as citizens is to figure out how all of these fit together and what their implications are.
Absolutely. And understand that you can have a case that seems legally simple, but it has massive consequences in the realms of politics, and in the realms of perception. And at the moment, like with all these cases, it's a battle of perceptions as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a quick break from this conversation, just keep you up to date with the headlines, make sure that you know exactly what's going on at this minute. And then we're going to keep speaking to Karyn Maughan. We're going to be looking through exactly how each of these cases relates to one another. We've also spoken about the implications for President Ramaphosa. We're also going to be starting to think through, what are the implications for Minister Gordhan? What are the implications for the public protector who's suffered another consecutive defeat? It's just gone 10:30. I'm Sizwe Mkhwebane, and we are in conversation with legal journalist at Tiso Blackstar, Karyn Maughan, to try and understand in more depth what all these battles between the public protector, the president, Minister Gordhan mean, especially in light of yesterday's judgment from the North Gauteng High Court, in which Judge Mulopa Sithosa suggested that President Ramaphosa had in large part, or in fact totally, complied with the remedial action, partly because no real deadlines were set for that remedial action. So we're speaking to journalist Karyn Maughan, but in the second hour, we'd also like to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this battle? What did you think of the judgment yesterday? What do you think the implications are for the president, for Minister Gordhan, for the public protector? We're always keen to hear your voice, so please do call in. The number is 011-883-0702, and you can also send us a voice note on WhatsApp on 072-702-1702. Karyn, we've spoken a little bit about the implications for the president and how this case also spills over into another legal battle, which is over this Bosasa report. What about Minister Gordhan? Let's look at some of the implications here. There's been a really quite vicious spat between Minister Gordhan and the public protector. The language that's been used has been of a different level to the language between the president and the public protector. And Minister Gordhan so far has prevailed in some of his legal challenges. How do we think this through from the perspective of Minister Gordhan?
I think in one of the problems where the difficulties in this matter kind of emanated from, or certainly up the ante, as it were, was that the minister, even as early as his evidence to the Zondo Commission, which I think was in October last year.
Oh my goodness.
It was a while ago.
Yeah.
Basically was saying that, and it may have been later, basically was saying that the public protector investigation against him, in relation to these SARS matters was politically motivated and part of a fight back campaign. And that accusation has been reiterated again and again and again.
Right.
What's interesting is, you see the president in his court papers with the public protector not going on that same line, because I think that unless you can prove it, I think that, that opens you up to a lot of difficulties, but certainly has raised, a number of questions around competence, grasp of the law, etc., etc.
Right.
We know that the battleground between these two individuals is very fraught. He, of course, will say, well, why is it that she released the Pillay report right before the cabinet reshuffle? That his argument in his court papers is essentially that timing was politically motivated. Why is she resurrecting a SARS matter that the NPA decided not to prosecute? That all these, or the NPA with the rogue unit, they're persisting with the prosecution, but they chose not to prosecute me. So, it's very obvious that relationship isn't defined by trust, respect, and what's the opposite of non-suspicion? But what's the opposite of suspicion? Because there's a huge amount of suspicion there on both sides of this.
Yeah.
And I often look at it and I think, God, it's like watching, like, when people, a couple get divorced and it gets so ugly that like, people are busy like trying to get custody of the goldfish. You know what I'm saying? It's like, damn, like it's really gotten degenerated to a point where, there's open hostility. And what I also found interesting yesterday was the judge actually saying that, in the way that and she didn't really go there in terms of Pravin Gordhan's, averments in the Pillay application, but she said that the way in which the public protector had written to Ramaphosa and the tone of her letters in which she basically told him that his lawyers were incompetent, etc., etc. She said that, that there was this accusation that there was a personal dynamic. She looked at that and possibly there was support for that accusation. When I spoke to the public protector's spokesperson, he very much denied that there was any kind of attempt by the public protector to act in a way that was driven by her personal feelings rather than the law. But it's very obvious that, on both sides of this, the situation is incredibly fraught. And it's not in the interests of a democracy or for any interests of any South African to have that kind of relationship happening between the executive and the public protector. I mean, what was interesting, and obviously at the time it was a little bit like frustrating because I always used to try and like prod Thuli Madonsela into saying something controversial. Yeah. But she had that whole thing about like speak softly to power and just try and get people to do the right thing, persuade them. Obviously, then the Nkandla judgment happened and it was very obvious what the public protector's powers were. But I think this public protector just feels like she is under a wave of kind of criticism, which she, I think, would believe is unfair, et cetera, et cetera. She said as much, and she needs to fight just as hard as her critics are. But then it becomes a kind of race to the bottom. And I don't actually know where it's going to end. And I think that, I think Minister Gordhan has been criticized in terms of the way in which he's chosen to express himself in his affidavit. But, if, this matter will be decided by a court of law. And Mkhwebane's lawyers have made it very clear that they want him to come to substantiate what he's saying and to prove it. We saw his advocate, Michelle Leroux, in court arguing, well, he's currently the subject of 4 investigations. He's had 2 reports against him. Why is he constantly being focused on? Right. And I think that, the public protector certainly has said to me, she's doing reports on Batebile Dlamini. She's doing a report on Mvula Mokonyane. She has faced accusations, certainly in the Estina case, that she totally ignored evidence against Mosebenzi Zwane and Ace Magashule.
Absolutely.
So I think part of it, in terms of her, and one doesn't want to have a thing where people feel like they have to do things in order to undermine narratives about them. But I think what will be important is certainly a display from her that, in fact, that there isn't a fixation on Gordhan and Ramaphosa, even though it feels like at this point there is. Maybe that's because that's what we are covering as media.
Okay. Absolutely. I think, this role of conspiracy in our politics as a whole has been shown in many ways through these battles. And I do want to return to that. But we do have a caller who's been waiting to engage for quite a while. So I want to go to, I want to go to Christopher. Christopher, thanks for holding. What's your view on this? Because I know that you have a view on what the implications are for the president.
Yes, thank you very much, Sizwe. My problem is that the judgment yesterday didn't deal with certain issues that if you are applying for an interdict, the judge should consider the 4 points that Advocate Dalimbo was talking about. One of them was a prospect of success, and the judgment says like the president has complied with the remedial action when we know that the president's legal statement was that I'm waiting for the review. So how do you say you're waiting for the review at the same time you're saying no? I've complied with the remedial of the actions of the public protector. It's just self-contradictory. So that's my problem. And another thing, remember, the President Cyril Ramaphosa has fired Tom Moyane based on the Nugent report, which doesn't have legal implications as the same way as the one with the the same way as the public protectors one. So I do have a problem with that when we are saying I'm interdicting this because of it's gonna be prejudice against the minister. Whereas we know we have dealt with the report, we have acted on the report that was based on Tom Moyane due to his SARS problem. So I do have an issue with that.
Okay. Yep. No, thanks a lot, Christopher, for sharing your views on the judgment. Your views on what Christopher said, in large part just reflecting on some of the arguments that were made against the president in that case.
I think the difficulty with this one, and I mean, if it does get appealed, and that's a big if, because I'm not entirely sure that it can be appealed, is that because she granted the first prayer, which was that he'd complied, the interdict wasn't really, she said as a consequence, the interdict would flow from that. So it wasn't really, the application wasn't really premised on the issue of the interdict. It was premised on the issue of compliance. And so as a consequence, she didn't really go into the issues of the interdict at all. It was really like, well, on the basis of has he complied?
Right.
Did he supply the implementation report? Yes. Did he defy a deadline by which he needed to take action? No, because no deadline was given. He said he will take action, but he is just waiting for for this matter to be resolved. And the court satisfied that amounted to compliance. That there may be an appeal against that, but because of the consequence of that order succeeding, the issue of an interdict wasn't really something that the court needed to go to. All it said was, as a consequence of the first finding, the interdict is granted, essentially.
Absolutely. Some of your WhatsApps also coming through. We've got Debo, who wants to differ from the previous caller, who says that the EFF are in fact compromising the office of the PP whilst they claim to represent and respect the independence of the office and its status in general. The attacks are opportunistic and arrogant as always. Karyn, I want to come back to what you were saying about the way this is starting to be viewed as a conspiracy on both sides of this battle. You've got Minister Gordhan saying this is not just about the public protector making a mistake. This is about a broader fight back strategy that is inside the ANC, inside the state, to preserve the kind of state capture that we saw in the Zuma era. You've also got the public protector, on the other hand, saying and intimating that there's this conspiracy to undermine her office as a whole because people wish to, do what they please, and private agendas are being forwarded under the guise of critiquing the public protector. And it just seems to me that these conspiratorial narratives are very dangerous in general, and that they feed a certain frenzied rhetoric that seems to be growing as the battle within and without the ANC intensifies. What are your thoughts on the uses of these conspiracy narratives in our politics right now as they relate to this battle?
Well, ultimately, kind of conspiracy may be based in real fear, may be based in real apprehension. I mean,
Sure.
We had this startling kind of revelation from the public protector that her bodyguard, I think her protector, had been the target of an attempted poisoning. She was on Twitter, I think, last week, basically comparing herself to Winnie Mandela because she felt that she had been targeted in the same way by Stratcom, i.e. journalists. And on the other side of it, to say that, to say that basically people are part of fight back campaigns against state capture, if you feel that, that they've stepped over the line in terms of investigating you. I don't know that that's particularly helpful. I think that it's part of the thing about claiming conspiracy is that it silences, because it means that anyone who critiques you or investigates you or opposes you is immediately delegitimized. And I think that that's part of the problem. Part of a healthy democracy is realizing that part of an act of patriotism is to question authority.
Absolutely. Even if that authority is proximate to you.
Exactly. And I think it was Patrick Lumumba said, I don't believe in messianic leadership, because when you turn leaders into messiahs, you turn them into gods, and then you can't question them. And I think that we're in a very difficult environment at the moment, because it certainly for me feels like if you start asking questions and saying, but this isn't making sense to me, you know, on all sides of it, this thing that you have to choose a side is very, very difficult, very, very problematic. I think is unhelpful to a democracy. You need to, as a leader in whatever position that you're in, understand and accept that your decisions and what have you will be questioned in a way that is appropriate, and essentially that no one is above the law. Absolutely. Some of your calls coming in. We are going to go to Dan now, who'd also like to reflect on this question. Dan, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Morning, Sizwe. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I've got two questions for Karyn.
Great.
Karyn, yesterday, and I also heard you repeating, yesterday the judge was talking about 3 remedial action, which is a bit confusing for me, because when you look at the public protector's report, the remedial action falls under clause 7. And under those clause 7, there's 2 for the president and the 2 for the commissioner for SARS. For the president, 2 of them says he must take note of the findings and then he must take appropriate remedial action. And then under clause 8, it's headed monitoring. That's when the plan comes in relating to the remedial action under 7.1. So when you look at this, there's only 2 remedial action, noting and taking appropriate action. The issue about the implementation plan is not a remedial action. So I'm just confused about why the monitoring under a separate clause, which is not a remedial action, kept on being referred to as a remedial action.
Okay.
That's my first question.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah. What's your second question?
My second question is, under the remedial action under 7.2, the commissioner for SARS was told to recover the 1.2 million from Ayeye Makhashula, the former commissioner for SARS. And then the second one is that you must ensure that patients are dealt with properly. But I'm more concerned about the first part of the remedial action.
You mean Opa Makhashula?
Opa Makhashula, not A Spring.
Yeah.
That's a whole other...
And then under clause 8 now, under 8.2, the commissioner himself also must put in the 30 days implementation plan. Now, the second question relating to the commissioner, you recall yesterday, the issue that was raised was the commissioner should have been enjoined in the application. The judge says, well, it doesn't involve the commissioner at all. Does that mean now we have a situation where the remedial action is that 1.2 million must be recovered from Opa Makhashula, and he didn't go to court because the judgment yesterday only dealt with what the president must do, not what the commissioner for SARS must do.
Thanks, Dan. We've got you.
2 questions.
And we appreciate them. Quite technical, legal questions there. Are you in a position to shed any light on those questions?
Well, the first one was that the public protector and the president both seem to accept that the implementation plan was part of the remedial action. I know it's under monitoring, but it forms part because it's essentially what he needs to do. The primary issue was really that there was no deadline by which he needed to take appropriate disciplinary action against Gordhan, and that was one of the main points. My understanding is that as a consequence of the president getting the relief that he has, that the other remedial action will be affected as well. But I'm not entirely sure if that is the public protector's position and whether or not, in fact, that SARS has, in fact, bought a separate application or is seeking a stay of remedial action in terms of the legal action that's been advised that they must take. So I think he raises very important issues. Certainly I will see clarity from the public protector's office at this point, but my understanding would be that in the normal course of events, because of the impact of the interdict, that it would stay the other remedial action, because the argument would then be made, well, if it is found that Ivan Pillay did lawfully get that early retirement, you can't then recover the money, and I suppose the argument would be made that you could reimburse him, but it would be significantly prejudicial to him, given that there's a pending legal case in the works.
Well, we will be talking to Mr. Sizwe, spokesperson of the Public Protector, after this, so we may put that to him as well. So thanks for that question, Dan. And now that we're on the subject of the Public Protector, we've spoken about the implications of this recent victory for the president and for Minister Gordhan in the Potterall judgment. Let's look at the Public Protector, because it really does seem as if she's on increasingly shaky ground. Just generally, it's never a good thing when an office of that importance loses so many high-profile cases in succession. And of course, with these main reviews coming round, it does seem as though there are very few lives left in terms of the legitimacy of the Public Protector.
I mean, I think the difficulty for her is that, the highest court in the land has essentially pronounced that in terms of her handling of the Reserve Bank investigation, she was dishonest and she could be perceived to have bias. She has a reasonable apprehension of bias. Obviously for someone in her situation to be ordered to pay what's estimated to be about 900,000 Rand in legal costs in her personal capacity is devastating. And I think, if one wants to understand the kind of implications of that, you read Mkhweb's judgment. I mean, I don't know where she's going to get that money from. I mean, it must be incredibly stressful to be in that situation.
Yeah. And to have to execute duties while you're in that situation.
And then you have the Estina judgment, where there's another finding of potential bias, that you just ignored evidence against people, didn't pursue it, etc. So she is in a difficult situation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And, it's difficult because, again, this office is really important. And it's a really crucial venue in our democracy. And now it looks like there may be an even greater political battle to possibly remove the Public Protector. And, we do need to think through what that may mean. We're going to come back after this quick break just to get Karyn some water and then think through what that means. Just about to hit 10 o'clock, I'm in conversation with legal journalist at Tiso Blackstar, Karyn Maughan, and we're wrapping up our conversation analyzing the latest judgment in the battle between the President, Minister Gordhan, and the Public Protector. Karyn, just coming back and trying to summarize and think about what this means for the Public Protector, as we were saying before the break. How many lives does she have left, and what are the implications of losing, especially the upcoming review battles, for the legitimacy of that office?
Well, I think it's appropriate that I nearly died in a coughing fit right before you.
We won't say sabotage was involved.
No, but I think that we all as a nation should be concerned. Because this isn't, I think we have a huge problem in terms of constantly personalizing things and creating politics around personalities. But this is not good for democracy. It's not good for our constitutional democracy that a watchdog body, which is meant to protect all of us, is at odds with the executive in this way, so publicly.
Absolutely. And so those reviews, we've got how many coming up? We've still got the president, reviewing, bringing part A and B of the Bosasa one. We've then also got this full review of the Gordhan Pillay one. And then is there also a full review of the other Gordhan matter with the rogue unit one?
All of them. All of them. All of them. We are going to be in court for months with this stuff.
Oh my goodness. This is going to occupy the news for a good few years, I feel.
It used to be Zuma, but now it's the Public Protector for me. So from one situation to another. But outside of, I think these matters need to be ventilated. I think the SARS rogue unit issue needs to be clarified. There needs to be legal certainty over whether it was lawfully established. There needs to be legal certainty over the obligation of the president to disclose who funded him. All of this stuff is necessary for legal discussion. But I don't know how happy people are going to be with the outcomes of these cases, because I think the other knock-on consequence is that now with these attacks on the judiciary, I think we're entering probably one of the most fraught spaces our democracy has ever been in. And that's why I'm saying we should all be worried about it.
Well, Karyn, thank you so much for joining us through various
Coughing comrades.
no sabotage involved, we assure you. That was legal journalist Karyn Maughan joining us to break down what's been happening in the battle between the president and the public protector.
Thanks for watching the content. Like, share and subscribe on all platforms. smwx.co.za to join the WhatsApp channel. And let's build a new conversation for a new generation. Ayeye.